Okay. Now, many of you are not new to my events, so you'll probably have seen some of the beginning of this this presentation. So bear with me because there's a lot of new people here tonight that I want to introduce what I do to them. Okay, so bear with me. And also also bear with me because I'm operating this all by myself. So if people need to be admitted, I have to sort of interrupt myself and let them in. Okay, so my name is Allison Scola. I am the owner and curator of Experience Sicily. Experience Sicily is a tour operator. I am a small boutique tour operator. I specialize in Sicily. I am a travel advisor as well as a designer, if you will. So in addition to leading small group tours in Sicily, I also design trips, custom design trips for people according to what they want, their time, their budget, and their interests. So it's something that I do a lot of, and I also do that for small groups who want to go together. So I'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. So here I am. I'm in the Mercato Antico Mercato in Ortigia in Siracusa, and let's go. I'm Uni. So I have a couple of polls tonight just to get you guys engaged a little bit. And the first question is, have you been to Sicily? So I'm going to launch that poll. And if it's up on your screen, I invite you to answer the question. So we'll just get a sense of how many of you have been to Sicily before. And that gives me a little bit of insight too into how much you know and how much I need to explain for the first or second time. So for some of you. Okay, we're going to end the polling in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so wow, 64% of you have been to Sicily. 36% of you have not been to Sicily. So that's a nice balance, certainly. And the 64% of you who have been there can certainly share the love and explain why it is just such an amazing place. So, so there you go. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So my next question is, and this is Ragusa Ibla we're looking at. If it works, let's see if I can get back to my screen here. Okay, oops, okay. My next question is, do you hope to travel to Sicily in the future? And if so, when? So I'm gonna launch that poll. You can answer this question multiple times. So if you want to go next summer and you want to go next fall too, you can put that in there as well. I welcome all the answers, but of course don't go crazy because I'm curious to know for my own curiosity. I want to know, what should I be planning in terms of when you think you're going to be able to go? Obviously, we know that the vaccination distribution is a very important piece of this, and also what Italy wants to do right now. Things in Italy are still very much like here. They have a lot of cases. Sicily, because it has a very, it's rural, and the hospital system is somewhat small there. They are on a lockdown until January 31st because they have a lot of cases post-holiday, but we know that it's going to get better still. So let's see. I'm going to end the polling in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm going to share the results. Let's see. So a lot of you, the winner is fall 2022, which I think is a wise decision. And yes, some of us do want to go in the summer and in September and October this coming year. But certainly spring 2022 and fall 2022 are most popular. So that's super helpful for me to know. And certainly I know that Julia Scalia, my cousin who's in Palermo, she and I are excited about when you're going to be there. Julia and I work together often, so we hope that you'll be there soon. So anyway, let's keep going. So thanks for participating in that. Okay, so once again, I am a tour operator. I do small group tours. I do custom itineraries for independent travelers. Small group itineraries. So if you have a group of people that you want to bring with you to go on a trip, your favorite friends, your family members, I can design a trip and lead it for you too, if that is what you want. I take care of all the details so you can enjoy your friends. I do heritage research and experiences in the towns from your where your ancestry is from. And also I do professional consultation on an itinerary that you reserve. So for example, Andrea Amato is on the call this evening, and 2 or 3 years ago, I did that for her and her family. I'm going to do it again this coming summer. She is going to reserve everything, but I'm consulting her on the itinerary that she and I have been talking about. I will also, yep. There you are, Andrea. I also do a Cannoli Crawl walking tour in New York City. So when we can do that again, and we'll be back on the streets of New York and tasting cannoli and talking about New York City immigrant history and etc. It's a wonderful, wonderful walking tour. And then I do stateside gatherings and online Sicily inspired events. And of course, you can follow me every day, generally daily, on Facebook, Instagram, and you can read my posts, various posts about Sicily. In Sicily is my partner in crime, my right arm, literally in this photo, Evelina. She and I are the ones who plan and execute all the tours for you. So Amuni, let's go. You can meet Evelina. Here she is. And here is my family. Evelina is there on my left, and Julia is in this picture next to Evelina in the pink dress. And there's a lot of them, and I miss them dearly. And this is a picture from a couple of years ago. So here's just a small group tour, montage of some of our groups in the past. Coming up, we have Enchanting Sicily in May, June 2022, which is going to be wonderful. Yoga in Sicily sometime in 2022, hopefully the summer, July 2022. And maybe this year we'll see Secret Sicily is a wonderful, wonderful off the beaten path small group tour. September 2021 and 2022, we'll be doing Stirring Sicily, which is cooking and wine. And October 2021 and 2022, we'll be doing Stunning Sicily. So you can visit experiencesicily.com to learn all about the details of these itineraries. And one of the things I'm doing right now is I am collecting names of people who are interested to attend these tours. You can reserve your spot now. And I'm not taking any deposits at the moment until we know that it is going to be possible to take these tours. But if you are interested, after looking at some of the itineraries, please contact me, and I will put you on the list, and then we will proceed when it makes sense to do so. So just here's a look at Cannoli Crawl and some of the stateside events that I host: St. Joseph's Day, Santa Lucia, etc. And coming up, so this Friday we are doing Sicily-inspired yoga with Cleo Mallon, who is my co-host for the Yoga in Sicily tour. So you can meet Cleo, you can get a sense of her. We're going to be doing a few of these in the few months ahead. So yoga-inspired or Sicily-inspired yoga will be this Friday. And then on Saturday this week, I'm teaching a fresh pasta with pistachio pesto class, as well as a Sicilian orange salads. So this is wonderful because these things are in season right now. Your supermarket's probably filled with pistachios because of the big game coming up. And so it's a wonderful winter dish, sticks to your ribs kind of pasta dish. So we'll learn how to make fresh cavatelli and then also pistachio pesto. And to be announced, I'm waiting for the olive oil to arrive. So we hope to do this olive oil tasting and discussion as soon as the olive oil gets to the United States. We're waiting for it. So that will be soon as well. So let's get started. Amoni. Here I am with Angelo in the Mercato again in Syracuse. So let's get started. So Sicily. So many of you know, since you've been there, where it is. It's in the center of the Mediterranean, and it's at the toe of the boot of Italy. and it is the largest island in the Mediterranean. So important to note, here we are looking at the entire Mediterranean region, and here is Sicily in the center. So going back to ancient times, this island was populated before the Greeks and the Carthaginians. We know that, okay? So there were 3 different tribes, and I'll talk a little bit about them. But obviously, a lot of the history that we have now is talking about from the times the Greeks and the Phoenicians, who became Carthaginian, started populating Sicily. So if you look right across the sea here, the Ionian Sea, you can see that Athens, Greece is right from to the east. And so if you get in boats, you're going to be going exactly east. You're going to hit Sicily, especially eastern Sicily. Obviously tonight we're talking mostly about Western Sicily, but it's important to understand where, you know, the Greeks obviously were in Western Sicily too, and we're going to learn all about this in a moment. So then we have the western part of Sicily, which is our focus tonight, and the Phoenicians came from what we know as today as the coast of where Israel is, Lebanon, Jordan. The peoples of the ancient peoples, the Phoenicians that we called them, we're talking 700-800 BCE, before Common Era, okay, is the terminology I use. And they were strong seafaring mariners and traders from the east. And they were able to navigate the Mediterranean Sea and populated Western Sicily. And you can see here, Eastern and Western Sicily right down the middle. And in fact, they had a treaty at a certain point that really separated parts of Sicily between the Greeks and what became the Carthaginians. So I'll refer to them mostly as the Carthaginians now. What does that mean? Well, Phoenicians, think of the Phoenicians like the British. The British came to the United States, or what we know as America, North America, and then over time they became what we call Americans today, right? So that's the same concept as Phoenicians settled Western Sicily. They settled what we know as today as Tunisia. Tunis was Carthage at this time. And again, we're talking 800, 700 BCE, before Common Era. And those people became Carthaginian over time. Important to know is that they were extremely excellent tuna fishermen. The Carthaginians started the salt flats, and the reason they started the salt flats in Western Sicily is because they needed something to preserve the tuna they were catching. And so they salted the tuna in order to preserve it.
That's where all the Arabs were, on that side of Sicily.
So let's look here at these maps, because I think this is a really very helpful view of what the Mediterranean looked like. Again, we're looking at 500 to 300 BCE, right? So ancient Carthage on the left, ancient Greece on the right. And so you can see really ancient Greece really populated what the coast of Turkey, all of what we know as the Peloponnesian, or the Greek peninsula today, right? And then the boot of Italy, where we're Puglia, Basilicata, Calabria, and Campania, okay? And then all of Eastern Sicily. So from Messina, which at the time was called Zankel, and down to Siracusa, which was the most important city in the ancient Mediterranean. You can see all this dark orange here. That is where the ancient Greeks were. But then they started working their way west, okay? And so that's when we started having problems. So the Carthaginians, if we're looking back at the left map, they populated all of Western Sicily, starting Palermo. They established first, because they weren't colonists. The Greeks established colonies because they needed to expand. They had too many people in ancient Greece, and they needed more property. They needed to begin new societies. So they established different colonies. And what's important to know too is that who settled in Siracusa versus who settled in what we know as Messina versus who settled in Magara Iblea, which then became Selinunte, and I'm going to talk about that in more detail soon. These were different Greek peoples. There wasn't a country like we have today called Greece. They were Hellenic people, and they had different cultures in among them, and these different Greek peoples fought with each other and had, you know, things going on between each other. But then they had this common sort of adversary, which was the Carthaginians. And you can see how extensive Carthage was, all the way to Spain, to the Straits of Gibraltar, all along the north coast of Africa, what we know as Libya today, and of course Tunisia, as Sardinia and Corsica, and all the islands off of Spain as well. So again, the Carthaginians were extremely technologically advanced. We don't know much about them. Why not? Well, the Romans didn't want you to. And this is something that is, you know, we're starting to learn more about this now, because some scholars are really spending time on the Carthaginians. But the Romans were determined to obliterate the Carthaginians and didn't want you to know anything about them. It was a Holocaust that happened with the Punic Wars. And by 250 BCE, Carthage fell to the Romans, and you know what happened? Well, off of the coast of Western Sicily, they had some pretty strong sea battles, and the Romans finally were able to capture a Carthaginian ship.
Carthage was from where? Tunisia?
And then what happened was they reverse engineered that ship and were able to copy it and make Roman ships with the technology the Carthaginians had. And then once the Romans were able to do that, that's when they were able to overpower the Carthaginians. So it's a really interesting story, you know, of war. And this went on for decades, this war. So just to go and give you an overview of history in Sicily, you know, we're going back to pre-Greek, pre-Phoenician people. Okay, here's your sort of bullet points, because and I can't go through everything ad nauseum, but certainly it's important for our discussion today to sort of understand where these things fell, and certainly the first part of this list. So 1200 BCE, we have ancient pre-Greek and pre-Phoenician peoples, the Elami, the Sicani, and the Siculi. And I write it in this order because it's the west is where the Elami were, the Sicani were in the west and the center of Sicily, and the Siculi were in the eastern part of Sicily. In around 775 BCE, the Phoenicians decided they were going to establish some colonies finally on the island of Sicily, some trading posts. One was Zeitz, which is Palermo today. Another one is Selinunte, which is near where Bagheria is, where my family is from. So it's a little bit east of Palermo, not far. When you take a car, it's 20 minutes in the car east of Palermo. And also Mozia, which is off the coast of Marsala. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So Mozia is in a little island. It's quite beautiful, and it's right near all those salt flats and near all of the windmills on those salt flats. So was also a Phoenician outpost, which became Carthaginian. On the east side, the Greeks established a colony at Giardini Naxos, and that was in 735. This is the first colony that they really set down their roots to be establishing a city there. Now we know that prior to that, the Greeks and also the Phoenicians had been trading with the Siculi, the Sicani Elami tribes prior to this time, but it wasn't until 735 BCE when they actually established Giardini Naxos in eastern Sicily. In 264 BCE is when the Romans began their campaign to take over the island and create Sicily as their breadbasket to feed their empire that they were building. They were quite ambitious. So Sicily is actually the first colony of Rome. And like I said, it took them some decades to finally overcome everyone, all the Carthaginians and all the Greeks, and they were very political in terms of how they did that. And the Greeks kept going back and forth between their who was going to work together, you know, common enemy or not, and it's quite complicated, and that's what we call the Punic Wars. But one of the things that's very important to note in terms of what we're going to talk about is also 380 CE, which is when Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. So prior to that, and then we're talking AD in some people's language. CE means common era. Okay, so 380 common era is when Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire, which means prior to that, the peoples of Sicily had different divinities, which we call paganism. And so I'm going to talk a lot about that tonight, and also in the subsequent presentations about these topics. And like I said, this particular presentation is the first one. It's the first time I'm doing this one, so bear with me. I wasn't very ambitious about how much we could get through in one session, but the idea is I'm writing a book, and I wanted to start presenting some of the things that are in the book I'm writing. So we're going to start our tour tonight, our like overview of what I'm talking about in Erice. Okay, and what we're going to do is, you know, I'm going to sort of move through time. I'm going to jump around a little bit, but it will make sense in the end, because I want to give you a historical context as well as geographical. So here is Erice up in northwestern Sicily. And if you have been there, you will remember this incredible view. And part of the whole thing about Erice, and here we are, we're looking at Monte Cofano from the lookout right at the Castello di Venere. The Castello di Venere is the temple of where the Temple of Venus was for centuries, and then the Normans built a castle there. So here is the remains of the castle, or there is some, you know, structure still of this Norman era castle. So when I talk about the Norman era castle, it is the 1400s is when they built this. So they knocked down this temple to Venus that had been there for centuries and used the materials from the temple as well as other materials around to build the castello. And here's another view of it from another ridge across the way. Now, a lot of times people say, oh, that little castle down there is the Castello di Venere. No, it's not. This is a totally 19th century building that's been renovated in the last 10 years. And it's actually a science center now. They call it the Lighthouse for Peace in the Mediterranean. It's a very interesting place to visit, but it's new, so to speak, compared to this temple site and castle that is on top of Mount Erice. So I'm going to read somewhat here because I don't want to mess my facts up to tell you about Erice. But I think what's really interesting too is this coin that you can see here. And this coin it's a Roman era coin. It says Erice on it, and it has the Temple of Venus on top of the hill here on the hill. So imagine, I'm going to go back to this view, because imagine you are looking to establish a place to worship the goddess of love. Where would you put it? You would put it where there's an incredible view. So we are looking at the Tyrrhenian Sea. That is the north part of Sicily, is where the Tyrrhenian Sea is. So really the Mediterranean is the southern sea of Sicily, or the African Sea is also another name for that Sicilians will call it. But the north part of Sicily is the Tyrrhenian Sea, and where Trapani is where the Mediterranean and the Tyrrhenian Sea meet. So the town of Erice, and you put the accent on that first syllable, Erice, is named for Eryx or Eros, the mythological son of the goddess of Venus and her lover King Butte of the ancient Elemi tribe. So a note that the Greco-Roman hero Aeneas was his half-brother. Erice boasts the 12th century Norman castle known as the Castle of Venus, or the or Castello di Venere, which was built from reclaimed materials of ancient Roman temple dedicated to the goddess of love, the Temple of Venus Idalium. Okay, Idalium is an ancient city in Cyprus from where the cult of Venus originated. So if we go back to that map of the Mediterranean, we have to think about where Cyprus is. It's the east, it's south of the Greek peninsula. It's obviously today very important. It's a different country than Greece, but it's important to know that Aphrodite the Greek goddess of love, Aphrodite, who became, when the Romans took over, they adopted everything about Aphrodite and made her Venus, came from the East. Okay, and I'm going to come back to that later. So for centuries, those seeking carnal blessings and success with procreation would make their way to the secluded top of Mount Erice, or Mount Erice, which is 2,460 feet above sea level. And you would be looking at this magnificent promontory overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea. So before the Romans constructed their temple, perhaps that temple that is on that coin is from the late 3rd century BCE. The site was dedicated to the ancient Elemi tribe's mother goddess of fertility, Potenia. Some historians say as far back as 1300 BCE. So the Elemis had their ancient goddess, Potenia, and she was a mother goddess of fertility. When the Phoenicians, Carthaginians ruled Erice, this sacred spot was dedicated to Astarte, or Ishtar, their goddess of love, fertility, and war. For a time, the site was dedicated to the Greek goddess of love, pleasure, and beauty, Aphrodite. However, once the Romans conquered Western Sicily, definitively this part in 241 BCE, seeing a hallowed connection through their hero Aeneas, okay, the son of Aphrodite Venus, they brought the complex to its full glory. So they built this new temple, okay, in that era, 241 BCE is when they took over, and they built a temple at that time. So that's somewhat of a newer temple compared to what we see in Selinunte and what we see in Segesta, if you're familiar with Segesta, and as well as what we see in Agrigento, if you have been there. So this temple that was there was somewhat newer. When the Phoenicians, through the centuries, priestesses of the goddess of love practiced the art of sacred sexual rites here. Pilgrims journeyed to the summit of Mount Erice to honor this goddess. So if you've been to Erice, you will remember part of the day of going to Erice. Some of you may have taken the funivia, the cable car up the side of the mountain, but many of you, if you look, you can see at the bottom of this picture the switchbacks that exists as the road. The road literally snakes up the mountain. It is so high up. And you can tell from this view just how high up it is. Imagine, now you got to go probably in a car or in a pulmino, right? So in a small coach, if you were with me. And also that cable car, imagine having to walk up there or take your donkey or your, however you had transportation. It was a pilgrimage. It was hard to get there. And so it was an ideal place to have such a temple there where you practice sacred sexual rites. So according to the Blue Guide of Sicily, okay, neither Strabo nor any other ancient source gives particulars of the situation at Erice, but this has not prevented persistent rumor that the girls were initiated at the age of 12 or 13 after being trained in the art of lovemaking, that they retired at 21, rich, and were much sought after as wives. That visitors to the temple were expected to leave gifts for the girls in exchange for this sexual act, during which it was believed they assumed the guise of the goddess herself, and that the girls were fed on large quantities of milk and honey to make them pleasantly fat. It is also said that they seldom conceived, perhaps because they were made to drink a concoction of hemlock and parsley root, specially prepared by the priests and priestesses. Okay, so I know many of you are probably in shock when I talk about sacred sexuality, but we cannot consider this in our Judeo-Christian mindset. This is a very different concept of the divine feminine and the life source and what sex does in terms of providing people connection to the divine. And so that, I think, is how we need to frame what was going on in Erice during ancient times, okay? However, fast forward now to the 12th century when the Normans were in power, okay, and the Normans were extremely Christian, or at least they used Christianity as part of the way they could control and connect people, although they didn't impose it on everyone, which is part of the beauty of the Normans and their ruling idea. They were very embraced multiculturalism, as many of us know. So according to the Time Traveler's Guide of Sicily, which is written by Jacqueline Alio and Lou Mendola, who are guides that I know in Palermo. Well, Lou writes mostly, but Jacqueline is one of the guides, and I have a podcast with her talking about Queen Margaret, which you can hear on Sicily, it's called. Arab geographer Indrisi, he observed that the women of Erice were among the most beautiful in Sicily. So even in the 12th century, this Indrisi was really important in documenting a lot about what the Normans were doing. He was in the court of Roger II. Yes, Roger II. And so even then he would talk about how beautiful the women of Erice were. So again, I need you to consider it differently than we might today, looking at this practice. Important also is, okay, so the Normans came in 12th century. What do you think is still going on there? People are still going to Erice looking for this sacred connection to the divine feminine. And they probably had to figure out how to stop it, because people were used to going there for this reason. And if you talk to people in Erice today, you'll see Bar Venus and the Pasticceria Venere, and you'll see they're still very connected to their Venus history, and they're not ashamed of it. They're happy to talk to you about it. And that's the thing, when you start talking to local people about what is going on in folk history, they will tell you, of course our Madonna that we worship today is connected to the Venus that was here for centuries. So again, I think this coin is fascinating to see. That's how important Erice was during Roman times and to Romans. It really was a pilgrimage place. And again, once to get there took quite effort. So there you go. And it because of its location at the top of this mountain, which by the way, you feel like you're in the clouds when you're there, if you haven't been there, it really is secluded. It gives you that privacy, let's say, to do these kind of ancient rites. So moving on a little bit, I'm going to just preview this. I hope to talk about this Venus and what goes on here in down further down the coast in Marsala a little bit in another presentation. Because there's some interesting things. The Venus connection in Western Sicily is peppered throughout. And so if you go to the Archaeological Museum in Marsala, which is not very big, but is chock full of information and fascinating things, you will see this statue of the Venere Calipidia. And she is a Roman copy of a 2nd century Common Era statue. So it's a more modern statue, but it's a Roman Venus, right? And so we're talking about Venus during Roman times. The interesting thing about where this Venus statue was found, which is actually really close to where the museum is today, is next to the museum and sort of between the museum and this church, San Giovanni Battista, is where this statue was found. There is a Grotto della Sibella. So it's a Sibyl underground in the church of Saint John the Baptist. Okay, so that tells you something. Saint John the Baptist Church, there is a spring-fed pool in a cave that is now a small chapel inside this church, and you need an appointment to visit it. I have been there. It's fascinating. And it was the cave of the Sibyl where people would go to learn prophecies, right? So I'm going to talk about this in another lecture, but I wanted to show that the Venus connection along the coast in Western Sicily is very, very prominent and powerful. So we're moving down the coast, and you can see Erice, Trapani, Marsala again, and Mozia is sort of not, the islands you see are Favignana and Marettimo and Levanzo, which are the Egadi Islands, but sort of in this map, this little drawing map, there is Mozia, which I spoke about. And again, that was a very important, over time became a very important Carthaginian city, and known as Lilibeo, okay? But it is now modern Marsala, which Marsala means the port of Allah, okay? And then that was a very important Muslim stronghold and port And that's a whole other story, a whole other history, which I'm not going to get into, but to know that that was going on. The influence of North Africa and the Arabs on Western Sicily is extreme. And one of the things that I always use as an example, they eat couscous, right? This is where you find couscous in Sicily. It is part of their regular cuisine. And that is an example of how influential the North African customs and ways were influenced or adopted and part of Sicilian culture. So moving down the coast, we are going to see Selinunte now. Okay, so Selinunte is very important. And it's actually much overlooked. When people are only in Sicily for 10 days, it's very, very difficult to get to Selinunte in your itinerary, because you really should see Etna and you should see Agrigento, and maybe you'll even see Segesta, but Selinunte is really for the people who are really interested in ancient history and maybe have been to Sicily before. So I think it's fascinating because you can still walk on the temples. It's not a UNESCO site. I think they want to make it one, but it's kind of it needs a lot of work to be able to get that appointing. Becoming a UNESCO site takes a lot of preparation, and the towns have to do a lot of commitment to tourism to be able to sustain the tourism that will come. And not every town can do that. So in a way, it's kind of an advantage for us that Selinunte isn't one, because we can still really get up close to the temples. This is Temple E. They don't name the temples unless they know. Archaeologists do not tell you the name of a temple or to whom it was built unless they have evidence of for whom it was built. We assume Temple E, again, it's an assumption, was for Hera, the goddess of marriage. She was married to Zeus, but we don't know for sure. So, but it is quite extraordinary to see. And again, this is they rebuilt it from the rubble. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Selinunte now. So Selinunte was founded by ancient Greeks in 651, 650 BCE. All right, so again, we were in Erice. We're going to leave that behind for now. But at the same time that Erice was doing what Erice was doing, when it was Elemi and then Carthaginian and then eventually Roman, Selinunte in southwestern Sicily was also thriving for a time as a Greek city. It's named for the wild celery, the Selinon, that was prevalent in the landscape here. And it was founded as a sub-colony of Magara Iblea. Okay, Magara Iblea, if you know, is in eastern Sicily. It's between Catania and Siracusa. And the people from the city of Magara Nicea in Greece were who founded Magara Iblea. Now, Magara Iblea is named for Iblea, who was a primordial goddess from that area of Sicily, which we know is the Iblean Mountains. And I'm going to talk about Eastern Sicily in a whole other time, months from now probably. But it was a very difficult colony to maintain because really it was in a swamp. And they just could not maintain Magara Iblea. So eventually, and it's one of the first, by the way, it's very important because it's one of the first colonies in Eastern Sicily, a Greek colonies, Magara Iblea, but so difficult to maintain. And so eventually they decided to give up on it and move to Selinunte, founding Selinunte, because there was encouragement to go west, right? Sounds familiar, and establish something in the west. Now, this was not easy to do because the Carthaginians were in the west and they were not having the Greeks in the west. They didn't want it. But let's talk a little bit about what the Greeks were able to do. So they were farmers, which is very important for what we're going to talk about in terms of our next temple site. And they the town was founded in the middle of two rivers, the Salinon and what we call today the Modione and the Catone River. So the Modione and the Catone River are the two rivers that you know, if you think about Manhattan, right, in New York City, we have the East River and we have the Hudson River. So imagine Selinunte was sort of like that. That was the concept of where they put this city, where they started to build it. And it was well known because it constructed massive temples to their gods. So this temple was one of 10. I mean, imagine just your own town, right? Because I think it's hard for us to conceive of this, but how many churches are in your own town, right? How many churches, when you walk down the street in New York City, how many churches are there, and to whom are these churches built, right? We have a church for Our Lady of Guadalupe, a church for St. Joseph, a church for St. Peter, right? So essentially, these temples were like your modern churches. I want you to put it in that context. And I think that changes how we think of things, because next door to this, we think, you know, it's Temple F, but we want to say, oh, maybe it could be the Temple of Dionysus, you know? The other thing about these temples and where the Selinunte was, and I will show you a map momentarily, and to position of it, was these temples, and they had one to Apollo, and they were building one to Zeus, etc. They were massive, and they had on them, and we have in the museum, in Salinas Museum in Palermo, we have these gorgons that were on the front of the temples. And the idea was they were like lighthouses, because they often would put fire in the temples to light them up at night. And they were painted many bright colors, usually some reds and blues and whites, because they didn't have marble. So this material you're looking at is probably well, it is a limestone. And if you look closely at the columns that are pictured here, you can see some white on them, because that was painted. It was like almost a plastering to make it look like it was marble. Sicily doesn't have a lot of marble in it, or like it does now, Custonacci actually, but they didn't find that marble during ancient Greek times. So they built out of limestone. And in fact, in this area of Sicily is a really fantastic, the quarry where they collected the limestone to build these temples. Anyway, so the thing is the Greeks were always trying to show their power. So when you were coming from the sea, these temples rose up pretty massively from the sea, and the idea was to show their power. But you know what? The Carthaginians weren't having it. They did not want the Greeks in Western Sicily. They wanted to own Western Sicily, and they found it to be really problematic to have the Greeks there. So in 409 BCE, they in 9 days they destroyed Selinunte. How did they do it? Well, you saw where Carthage was. It's on the coast of Africa. They got large animals. They started with the campaign with bringing large animals on their boats and releasing them on the shore of Selinunte. So imagine you're at home one day and you're making your couscous or whatever you're doing. You're cooking, you're cleaning, you're doing your laundry, and literally a lion shows up at your house, and a hippopotamus, and I mean, you name it. They just released elephants, etc., and people were terrorized and trampled. And then they lit the whole place on fire. In 9 days, this gorgeous, beautiful city, Selinunte, was destroyed by the Carthaginians. And then the Carthaginians took it over and created their own town there. But eventually, when the Romans came through in 250 BCE, they destroyed it again during those Punic Wars. And eventually an earthquake, and Western Sicily is prone to earthquakes just as Eastern Sicily is. Some of you may know about the 1968 earthquake, which may be why some of your relatives, if you're from Western Sicily, came to the United States. It was this massive earthquake in 1968. So earthquakes eventually destroyed Selinunte. So here is a picture of the site. It is massive. It's one of the largest archaeological sites in the world. In fact, it's a town. It's a massive town. And so we have to keep that in mind. You really can't, you can walk it on foot if you're very good at walking and you're used to hiking miles a day. But generally people take little carts to get around. And what we're going to talk about mostly during this discussion today is the Santuario Di Malaphoros, and that is the temple to Demeter and Carey, or Persephone. So if you've been to this site, you would have entered over here on the right side, and you can see Temple E and Temple F are here. And then you would have taken a little golf cart type of trolley through to the main Acropolis, which is here, and the two rivers are on either side of this Acropolis. And then when you cross the second river is where you get to the Santuario Di Malaphoros, to Demeter. Okay, and then, you know, it's been built and rebuilt. There, people were there during Byzantine times, etc. So a lot, you know, it's there's a lot of layers to this, but still the presence of the temples that we know, that we see today, is quite incredible. So here is a look, sort of a drawing from one of the maps I have from a book I have on Selinunte. And this is the Santuario di Malaphoros, which is what I'm going to talk about today. So I want you to see this temple up here. It is not your typical Greek temple that we are familiar with the beautiful 36 columns lining each, you know, 18 on each side, etc. kind of thing. This temple was built to be its own property. If you can see carefully, it has massive walls on either, you know, on the perimeter of it. It has a beautiful entranceway, but then once you get inside, it has its own sort of campo. It has its own garden area, which is where a lot of the rituals took place for Demeter. Okay, it was built, one of the first temples, in the 7th century BCE. So that also tells you something, how old it is compared to some of the other temples like Temple E that we just saw. So what went on in this temple? Well, and I want to show you, here it is. This is Tony Alessino's on the call tonight, and we were here in this temple. We did, during our Myths and Mysteries of Sicily tour in May 2019, we went and did a fire ceremony in this beautiful spot. And you can see the walls, how thick they are. We were inside the temple complex. And that's what it was. It was a temple complex. And how do we know that this is from Demeter? Well, because we found thousands of votives, okay, to the goddess Demeter and Kor, or her daughter Persephone, as many of us know her. Okay, we found busts. Here are more busts. These are pictures of just a tiny fraction of what we have found at this temple site, and this is from the Salinas Museum in Palermo. So this is the trick about Selinunte. The archaeological finds are mostly in Palermo. So I recommend spending time going to the museum, the archaeological museum Salinas in Palermo, either before or after you go to Selinunte, because then you can start putting together what these temples look like and the things that they have found there. There is a very small museum in Castelvolturno, which is actually the modern town away, you know, just 15 minutes north of Selinunte. And Castelvolturno has a small museum with a beautiful bronze statue that was found at the site. There are a few other artifacts there, but really the main treasure is in the museum in Palermo. So we can tell you that this was Demeter because of all of the votives that have been found at this site, including this particular, what do you call it? From one of the temples. Okay, this is Demeter, Kore, and Hecate. And these three goddesses were, the Hecate was there protecting the temple complex. She has a little temple within this temple complex. She's an important goddess also because she's the goddess of our underworld goddess. So I recommend, I have on Sicily, I did a podcast with Rosa Rizza, who's one of the guides I work with in Sicily, and we spent a whole 40 minutes or so talking about Demeter and Persephone and this myth and how important it is. So I really want to explain a few things about this place in Selinunte. Let me go back, and how important this place was. And essentially the importance of it is that, again, I want you to remember, this was an agricultural city. So agriculture and fertility and the making sure that the crops were growing, that the grain was growing, was essential. And so one of the first temples you're going to establish is to the goddess of the grain, the goddess of the harvest, the goddess of fertility. Who is that? Demeter and her daughter Persephone. And the two of them, the twin goddesses, are essential during ancient times for this, for the peoples of ancient Sicily, the Greek peoples of ancient Sicily. Now, Demeter is really important because she also established law, let's say. She established the cycle of agriculture in terms of getting people onto a schedule. She civilized ancient Greek peoples. So she could, you know, this was her worshiping Demeter was very important in terms of the Greek colony and the government of these Greek colonies, right? So the mystery of Demeter is very, very important to these ancient times, and also getting the peoples that were already living in Sicily on board with what the Greeks were doing, because it was colonization. So we have the Sicani and the Siculi people and the Elemi people. You had to win them over to the Greek ideals, right? And so what they did, now this myth that we know of Demeter and Core, which is when Hades abducts Persephone and brings her into the underworld, and then there's this negotiation because he makes her his wife. He feeds her pomegranate seeds, so she becomes his wife, but Demeter, the mother goddess, has let everything on the earth's surface die, right? And so she refuses to grow anything because she wants her daughter back. And the negotiation ends up being that half the year, or two-thirds of the year, depending on where you are, Persephone is above ground with her mother, and therefore we have spring and summer and the harvest. And then when she goes below ground to be with her husband Hades, we have winter, right? So these are the essential sort of overview of this myth, and that explains the seasons and explains the cycles. But there's so much to this myth, and in fact, it's really important to know, what did they do in this temple complex in Selinunte? What did they do? So I'm going back a little bit because I want you to see, again, it was protected. It was positioned so that you could see water, which is important, but also it was, quote, mysterious. The rites of Demeter and Persephone were all about fertility. They were also about sexuality and the divine feminine, and finding that divine feminine, and also the acceptance of the becoming the young girl, the innocence of summer and spring, then going into the underworld and becoming a woman and embracing the darkness, because in the end, Persephone loved being the queen of the underworld. And again, you need to abandon your Judeo-Christian ideas about, quote, the abduction of Hades, abducting her, because really Zeus, the father, had arranged this marriage. And so through this, quote, abduction, Persephone was able to become a woman. And so that's an important part of the story. So the rites that the devotees of Demeter and Persephone and Hades, really also, the rites that they practiced in this sanctuary were very important. And one of the things that they say is, initiates, they understood about death and dying, and they were able to embrace death after doing the initiation. And it's very mysterious because they weren't allowed to tell non-initiates what went on during these rites. But one thing we know is that they did learn about, they had this ritual where they would go underground and they would then rise up from and have rebirth. And so that whole process of this ritual was part of the rites of Demeter and Persephone. And it gave the devotees a knowledge that it was okay to die because there was something else. There was a rebirth after. Sounds familiar, right? If you know Christianity, you know certainly I grew up Catholic. Our whole religion in Catholicism is based on the afterlife in a way. And so it's very, very similar to this concept of what they practiced here at this sanctuary of Malaphoros in Selinunte. Now, what is Malaphoros? Malaphoros means fruit bearer. It means bearer of the pomegranate, bearer of the apple. Okay, pomegranate apples, sort of the same kind of symbolism in the ancient world. So that's basically what Malaphoros means, is the fruit bearer. And again, it has to do with the fact that this was a agricultural society, and agriculture and fertility was very, very important. So I'm just going to read a little bit about this. Disciples spent 2 days of seclusion here without eating, which satisfied the mystic requirement of giving up the worldliness. They broke off their long privation, swallowing the kikion, which is a mixture of that Demeter formed of water, flour, honey, wine, cheese, and herbs. So they broke communion essentially as well. So there was a fast, and then they had this mystical communion. So, and this was something that was done annually in September, which is during the harvest time. So I want to at some point get more into the breads, etc., because there's a whole thing about the grains and the breads, and this pervades, and Salemi, and it has a whole thing with the breads, and same with now San Biagio Platani has a whole thing with the breads at Easter, which, you know, that's a much newer sort of ritual, but it goes back to ancient times when this area, this western part of Sicily, was not only Dionysus was very important here. I'm not going to talk about him today, because wine, grape growing, if you travel through Trapani, you'll see fields and fields of, it's a massive wine region. People don't talk about it as much as they should, but it is one of, if not the largest wine region in Europe. But also next to those vines are fields and fields of grains, and the two work off of each other. So anyway, I'm going to move on because we're running out of time here. So what else happened? So the Carthaginians took over in Selinunte, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I do want to just check in because I see some people are writing in the chat and I'm not paying attention to the chat, so forgive me. I guess you guys are talking to each other, which I encourage. Please do. And I just want to see if there's any particular questions, right? Your favorite myth. Okay. All right, good. So I see you all talking. Good, good, good. All right, so I'm gonna, afterwards, I get a copy of the chat, and I will address if there's questions that I can't get to right now. I will, I'll look at the chat and I'll write to you separately after. All right, and also I will take questions in a few minutes. So anyway, I do want to talk about what this is. So this is Tanit, and Tanit is a Carthaginian goddess. And this is actually pavement in Selinunte. You can see it, you can walk right up to it. And you can see that in the floor of the someone's house, they had marble pieces that formed Tanit. So after Selinunte was pillaged by the Carthaginians in 409 and 406 BCE, the Greek city became Punic for a time. The Carthaginians built a new town, recycling the materials and reclaiming temples from the magnificent Greek community that preceded it. Throughout today's archaeological sites, some ruins of homes and temples possess symbols of Carthaginian spiritual devotion. So here pictured, we see a mosaic created in the cement with fragments of white marble. The image represents the goddess Tanit, flanked by two caduceae or staffs. Tanit was revered by Punic people throughout the Mediterranean, the Western Mediterranean, and the north coast of Africa. She is a Punic heavenly goddess of war, a virginal mother, a nurse, a protector, and a symbol of fertility. So she embodied a lot of important stuff that, you know, many of the Greek goddesses had different responsibilities. Tanit had all of these sort of wrapped together. Placing this image in your home was a request for protection, harmony, prosperity, and fertility. The triangular body is rooted in the earth, while the circular head represents a connection to the upper world. Arms lifted are in an act of prayer. And also, you know, one of the things that divine feminine women, people who study the divine feminine will tell you that this also has the image of a vulva in a way as well. So important to note that. The triangular body is rooted in the earth, while the circular head represents a connection to the upper world. Arms lifted are active prayer. The two staffs represent the moon, crescent at left, on the left, and a bull. The moon staff helped the goddess, also a psychopomp. Psychopomp is a person who's like Persephone, who safely guides souls between the upper and lower worlds. The staff could also represent willingness of peaceful communication and negotiation. Tanit was the consort of the supreme god, Baal, the sun god who represents male fertility and prosperity, often represented by a bull image, hence the staff at Tanit's right. Baal and Tanit are of equal importance in the lexicon of ancient Punic gods. So there you go. So Tanit, you can look for this when you are in Selinunte, and certainly if you're with me, we'll point it out to you. So now moving back to Erice, because I'm bringing you up to modern times. So we take these sites and we sort of say, okay, well, what happens now? We know that in 1200s, in the 12th century rather, the Normans took over, and part of what they were doing was really Christianizing Sicily. Now, of course, the Byzantines were there before the Normans, and then the Arabs came. Okay, so this is important when we go back to that list. I didn't go over this part of the list so much, but you could have seen it. You know, there's a lot of confusion when the Normans come in, which is 1150 or so, okay, is when Roger II becomes the king of Sicily. There's a lot of confusion. What religion is going on, where people stand, right? And part of what the Normans did in terms of politically speaking was they worked with the Vatican. It was very important that the Pope was on their side. The Vatican was extremely powerful. And if you didn't have a political relationship with the Vatican, you were kind of not in good shape. So the Normans were very wise because, and again, the Normans is a whole other thing to talk about. I'm really trying to focus on divine feminine and these sites we're discussing this evening. But the Normans really, one of the things that they promised to do by getting the sort of divine right to rule Sicily and southern Italy at this time was they promised to rid the island of the Arabs, which they really didn't, because they found that the Arabs were wonderful contributors to many things in terms of technology. So they embraced them and they allowed them to continue practicing their religion, which, by the way, is very different from the Islam we know today. Islam we know today just was coming in during this era. That's important to note. But the Normans were Christian. They were very Jesus focused, which is very different from what the natives of the island were very goddess focused, and still today very much Madonna focused. It's important to really hear that. The three churches that we know, the most famous churches in Sicily, okay, are Monreale Cathedral in Palermo, in Monreale rather, the Cathedral of Cefalù, and then of course the Cappella Palatina in Palermo. These were all built by the Norman kings. They all have Jesus, the Pantocrator, the savior, at the head of the asp. However, that is Norman. If you go outside of that, when you are in churches in Sicily, I want you to pay attention who is at the top of the church. Usually it's the Mother Mary, okay, because the goddess is so important to the Sicilian mindset. And it goes back to Demeter and Venus and Core and Persephone, okay? I say Core is maiden. It's before Persephone becomes Persephone, the queen of the underworld. She is a maiden, virgin. So that's a term that you'll hear a lot. So what happens then? The Normans come, right? And their job is to bring people to Christianity who still are worshiping Venus, let's say, in Erice. Because again, imagine centuries and centuries, people have been going to Erice, to the top of this mountain, to practice the sacred rites of Venus. And now you're Christian. It doesn't go together, right? So we have to find a way to get people over from their worshiping of Demeter and their worshiping of Venus. We have to find a way to get them over to Christianity. That's part of what the Normans' job is, right? So I want you, I'm looking at this map here. This is, again, we're focusing up back very closely on Erice Custonacci. You have, so this is the long view, and then you get the close view. Look at how close they are to each other, okay? And Monte Cofano is, Custonacci is right at the foot of Monte Cofano, or Cofano, okay? So I want you to, again, look at this map, and you can get a sense of where Custonacci is. All right, why this is important. Here's the sanctuary in Custonacci. So today, and starting in the 1400s, they started worshiping this Madonna of Kustonachi. All right, I'm going to read again some of my writing about this so that I can place it for you. The image on the left is what the picture, it's a copy of the original picture painting. Okay, notice the color of her skin. I want you to notice the color of her skin. The one on the right is the current depiction of this painting that's been, quote, restored, that's in the Santuario, the sanctuary in Custonacci. I took that picture in January 2019 on the right, and the one on the left I took in May 2019 in Erice. So they restored, quote unquote, the picture on the right. I spoke with a woman in the church and I was like, she used to be darker. What happened? Oh, well, no, she was dark because of the candles burning, and over the centuries she turned dark. I will tell you that is not the truth. They whitened her skin. I mean, they did whiten her skin, but she wasn't white like that originally. She was dark like the one on the left. That is truly what she looked like. And I call this a Black Madonna. And I'm going to talk in another lecture about the Black Madonna of Tindari and certainly be writing about that. That is a Madonna Nera. We know she is. But there are Black Madonnas throughout Sicily. And depending on who you talk to, people will call them Black or not. This Madonna was Black. Not like an African Black. She was Caucasian with dark skin. That's how she's depicted because she's Eastern, Middle Eastern. She's from Sicily. If you look at Sicilians, a lot of Sicilians have, darker color, olive skin, etc. But not just that. The Madonna is a representation of Demeter, of Venus. These are sensual goddesses of fertility and love and love making. And they reflect the color of the earth mother. When you dig in your backyard, do you have white soil? No, you have brown soil. It's fertile soil. This is a fertile woman. As much as we call her the Virgin Mary, that's a Christian concept of what the great mother is. She's still a mother. Look at her breastfeeding Jesus here. She's a mother. She sustains life. So does the earth. The earth is brown. The earth is black. Okay, so I want you to think in those terms. So I'm going to read to you about this Madonna. So in Erice today, they venerate their patron saint, the Madonna di Kustonachi. As mentioned earlier, the town traces its origins to the pre-Phoenician, pre-Greek Elemi people. So let's also remember that Erice possesses the Norman Castello di Venere, or Castle of Venus, which was built on top of an ancient Roman temple dedicated to Venus, the goddess of love. And before that, the same site, with that amazing view, right, was dedicated to the Greek goddess of love, Aphrodite, and before that to the Carthaginian goddess of fertility, sexuality, and war, Astarte, and before that to the Elemi tribe's mother goddess of nature and fertility, Potenia. Okay, the region has a long history of sensual goddess worship, as we saw throughout this lecture tonight. Knowing all of this, is it any surprise that the patron saint is the Madonna versus somebody else, like Saint Joseph, for example? Furthermore, notice the color of her skin. Although the modern clergy at Erice's Mother Church and in Custonacci will tell you that the painting is discolored because of years of incense burning, I say, question them. The people of Erice love their mother goddess, a sensual goddess of love and fertility with roots to times long before the birth of Christ. Let's also consider how this particular iconography of this Madonna, officially called the Madonna of Custonachi, arrived in Erice. Now, note that this painting, Erice wants it because Erice is a more important city than Custonacci. So oftentimes the painting goes back and forth between the two places, but really tradition is that the painting belongs in Custonacci. Custonacci is a town down the mountain from Erice. Legend is that in the early 15th century, This painting of the Virgin and the child Jesus came on a ship from Alexandria, Egypt. So again, the east, right near Cyprus, okay? The sailors had miraculously survived a storm, having landed on the beach at Custonacci, and they voted to leave the painting as thanks to the Madonna for delivering them ashore safely. It is well known among scholars that the Catholic clergy during the 1400s were seeking a way to transfer the citizens' cult worship of Venus to the veneration of the Virgin Mary. Okay, so this again, this is very important. Additionally, the painting's origins have come from the sea, connected further to the goddess Venus. So that's important. All these paintings, their origins from the sea, from the east. She was born from Seaphone on Cyprus, okay, far away in the east. So the idea is that there was a storm. The soldiers survived. The sailors survived, and they decided, okay, well, we have to then leave this painting, and how are we going to determine where it should be left and where you should build a sanctuary for it? So horses charged with carrying the painting were making their way from the beach up to the top of Mount San Giuliano, which is a modern name for Mont Erice, which is the town of Erice. So the intention was to bring this painting to Erice, to where the beautiful promontory is, right? Yet they stopped and laid in place, refusing to move. That place was Custonacci. So to the townspeople during this time in the 15th century, it was a sign that this is where the super saint wanted her sanctuary to be built, and this is why it's where it is. So oftentimes these legends of when these Madonna statues arrive, there's usually oxen involved or horses involved, and the animals stop and refuse to move. Or in the case of Tindari, for example, in Messina, where the Black Madonna of Tindari is, they can't move. The painting itself stops the boat where it is and won't move. So they think of this as a divine right of where the Madonna wants to be. Okay, and so here is a picture of the sailors bringing this painting to shore, all the people welcoming her, and in the Custonacci sanctuary, along the top of the walls, they have paintings that sort of depict this legend. It's quite beautiful. So here's one of them you can see. So anyway, thank you very much. I'm going to take some questions, but before I do, again, I wanted to remind you of the upcoming events I have. Also available is the On Sicily podcast, which I recommend check out. I have some episodes that I have to finish editing and get out to you, and hopefully I'll be doing more of them in the months ahead. But of course, once again, I'm Allison Scola, so thank you so much for listening tonight, and do keep in touch, and hopefully when we can travel to Sicily, we'll be traveling there together. I'd love to host you. So I'm gonna, let's see if I can get out of here and stop sharing my screen, and I will see you all. And certainly if you want to type questions into the chat, or you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, I would love to answer them. And if you need to leave, because I know I said today was until 8:45, you can by all means excuse yourself. You don't need to stay. So please feel free to ask me questions. One, of course, is, what is your website? So experiencesicily.com is where you can find me. And what I will do also is I will, like I said, I'm recording this evening's presentation. I plan to put it up on YouTube for at least a month, if not just leave it there. And I will send you all a message saying it's there so you can find it at a later time. And I know there's a lot of people registered for tonight who couldn't be here, so they'll be watching it. Anyway, let me know if you have some questions. But
Allison.
Yes.
Ciao, Bella.
Hi, Camilla.
Camilla qui. See, my question is, I can't understand how the Carthaginians, why did they end up going so far west? Like, were the Greeks on the East Coast and they just didn't want to compete with the Greeks, and they just made their way further? And did they go on land, or did they go by sea?
They mostly traveled by sea, and that was the advantage that they had. I don't hear you.
Oh, I lost you.
You can't hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, you need to put your headphones
I took my earphones out.
Okay,
Sorry.
yeah, that would be helpful. So,
okay.
To answer one question, On Sicily is the podcast, and it's available on most podcast suppliers. So Google and Apple, etc. You can find On Sicily, and you can also find it on my website too. Anyway, to answer your question, Camila, yes, the Greeks were very powerful. So in the eastern part of the Mediterranean, the Greeks really ruled the roost there, and the Carthaginians were very technically excellent with their shipping, and they weren't interested for many centuries. They weren't interested in establishing colonies. They just wanted to have trading posts. So similar to the Dutch, right? The Dutch weren't interested in colonizing too much. They really just wanted to trade. And so they focused more on the Western Mediterranean until then it became obvious that they needed to really start establishing some cities. And that's when they did. And there was kind of, for a time, the middle of Sicily has a couple of rivers going through it. So, and now it's hard to tell because they're dried up. You know, we're talking 2,000 some odd years ago, 2,500 years ago. But there was, in the center of Sicily a series of rivers that could act as a border. And so there was sort of a gentleman's agreement that the Greeks would be on the eastern side and the Carthaginians would stay on the western side of Sicily. And eventually, though, that started to fray, that agreement. And that's when the Peloponnesian War started happening. And so Imera is a very important battle, for example. And then, of course, when they took over Selinunte in 409 BCE, that was a huge blow to the Greeks. So that's when it was like the myths, what do you call it? The gloves were taken off kind of thing. They just went at it from there to each other. So.
Okay.
Allison.
Thank you.
Yes, Francesca.
Volevo chiederti, did you say, I think I couldn't hear at some point, but did you say that they were the devotees of Persephone going themselves underneath the ground? Or
yes. So
okay,
that
cool.
temple complex in Selinunte, and this is true for many of the temple complexes for Demeter and Persephone, that they had an underground component to them. They had caves or passageways that went underground. And so there was, these rituals actually were practiced at night so that you had the sense of being in the quote underworld. What we know is that they often kept some of the remains of sacrificed pigs. That's one of the things they sacrificed, and they would mix that with some other grains and such. And part of it was giving it to the goddess at underground and Hades too. So part of that ritual was really embracing the darkness. That was an important part of these rituals. And they literally would go underground, and then they would have this rebirth part. And again, we know very little because they weren't allowed to share this information. They weren't allowed to document it. But people who observed it from afar could say that the people, after they emerged from the underground, would go into the sea and clean themselves in a rebirth, i.e. a baptism in a way. And then they would return to the temple. Yes, return to the temple, where they would then have a purification of, not eating for a couple of days, and then break that fast with, quote, the communion, let's say. So again, these mysteries.
But were they devotees to Persephone or to Demeter? Persephone, I'm assuming, if they went to the underworld.
Both. And that's the thing about the mother-daughter. And again, this is good. You can really see how Christianity adopted a lot of these relationships. We have a mother-son in Christianity, and here we have mother-daughter. And a lot of times in ancient, I was reading about this today, these two goddesses were always together. Persephone, in fact, when she is depicted, is just a younger version of Demeter. Demeter looks older because she's the mother, but they are often depicted the same. They'll have a piglet, they'll have a torch. And when I talked about Santa Lucia in December, when we did our Santa Lucia event, the torch is very important because she brings the light down to the underworld. And Demeter used a torch when she was looking for Persephone, when Persephone was missing and she didn't know where she was. So when we see these icons, these statuettes that can be found, and there are thousands of them. In Siracusa, there are thousands of them, and here there are thousands of them from Selinunte. It's hard to tell who's who because they look so similar. But
right, and wasn't that actually more linked to Siracusa with the fountain and the whole thing? Wasn't that it? No?
Well, the fountain you're talking about in Siracusa is for Aretusa, which is a nymph.
Oh, yes, you're right. Arethusa. Okay.
So
you're
that's
right.
different.
Yeah.
A totally different story. But again, the virgin connection there is important, and that's the whole thing I talk about when I discuss Eastern Sicily and when we're there. But that idea of the going down into the underworld and facing your demons and facing the things that you're afraid of and facing death and what death is, this is vital to this story. That we don't talk about it so much, but when you start getting into the significance of the Demeter and Persephone story and what Persephone experienced, it's essential to so many things in our humanity. Like I said, the becoming a woman. What I also love, and one of the things I talk about in the On Sicily podcast with Rosa Rizzo when we talk about this myth is one of the things when I was in Sicily in Easter in 2019, and you'll see in San Biagio Platini, for example, and this is true in Scicli, in many different places, they have a ritual where part of the town is the Jesus side of town and part of the town is the Mary side of town. And on Easter Sunday, they process these two statues. And, you know, people spend all the time, I'm on the Jesus side, I'm on the Mary side, right? The statues come together and they kiss at Easter, which is primavera, which is spring, which is the rebirth, right? It's the rejoining of mother and son. Well, I think that ritual, which is very Sicilian, is really a recreation of Demeter and Core when Persephone comes back up to the top of the upper world and her mother greets her with joy and the two of them embrace. This is all part of the story of
And where is that Jesus and Mother ritual? What town?
Well, the one I experienced in Easter 2019 was in San Biagio Platini, which is Agrigento province. But this kind of thing where Mary and Jesus kiss on Easter Sunday in the middle of town happens all over Sicily, and also probably other towns in southern Italy as well. Scicli for sure, but many towns do this ritual. And it's
Scicli is where they
adorable.
have La Madonna a Cavallo, vero?
Madonna del Cavallo.
Yeah, there is. It's the only Virgin Mary that is actually riding a horse inside of the church.
Oh yes, in Scicli, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
She's beautiful. Wow.
Yeah. So, you know, these the mythology, the rituals from the past have been recreated in modern times in just different forms in order to have the Christianity be embraced by the local people. Because I always say this, you know, it's all right. I've been to the one in Modica. They call it the Vassa Vassa, right? It's fantastic and so moving. Yes, and in fact, Lilia is from Messina. She lives now in New York City, but also in Palazzo La Criede in Ragusa province. They do this also, the same thing. It is a big part of Easter Sunday for people to go to see this happening, Mary and Jesus kissing in the center of town. Yeah, Lilia, visit the link. She takes beautiful photos. Yeah, I can't remember what I was saying, but who else has a question? Chris Mansella, please.
Hi, thank you so much. This has been amazing, and having been to Sicily, this is so enriching, and now I have to go back.
Thank you.
My question was, I had been to Agrigento, and there was a complex that was very similar to what you were showing earlier. Is there similar influences there, or?
Yeah, exactly, yes. So some people will tell you that there is a temple to Demeter. It's kind of near the temple of Juno. It's up on the hill, and it's actually where the administrative offices of the site are now. So none of us go there. However, on the other side of the site, so once you walk down from Juno and Concordia, and then you go through Temple of Zeus, on the other side of the Temple of Zeus, which not many people get that far, there is a whole other temple complex, which is, I can never pronounce this word, the Chthonic temple complex, where we call the Temple of Castor and Pollux is there. No, that's just like some name that some archaeologists gave that site. And it really, that now they're learning more about that site. That is where these rituals for the dark goddesses, for the underworld, for Hades, for Demeter and Core, that's where these rituals happen in that temple complex that's there. And one of the things that the similarity you can see is there's a circle, sort of a fountain that's in front of the temples, and so that has something to do. That's like from Greece too. That same circle concept. Maybe it was a fountain. I don't know. I have to do more research about it. But if you look at like this picture here. If I can, you see the circle, here it is. This is the drawing I showed of what the temple looked like, perhaps. But this circle a circle like that is also found in Agrigento in that section. Again, past the Temple of Zeus over there, where the chthonic mysteries were practiced there.
Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else? So I hope to do more of these as I do more sort of research to write the book I'm writing, which is more focused on divine feminine sites and sacred sites in Sicily. It's going to be sort of a way to travel through Sicily through this lens of the sites that are devoted to the female deities, but also I can't not talk about Saint Joseph and Dionysus, because to me those are they're equally important. So I'll be getting to that as well. So hopefully there'll be it'll take some time. Round 2, round 3. We really just scratched the surface tonight, and I really appreciate you entertaining me by listening to this discussion. There's so much to uncover, and I really, I'm not an archaeologist. I am someone who's fascinated with obviously Sicily, but also these legends and the significance of them in terms of ancient rites and ancient religions. So yes. So thank you so much. Does anyone else have any other questions? If not, I'm gonna say goodnight and sign off. Thank you so
Ciao,
much, all
Bella.
of you.
Grazie
Ciao.
mille.
Thank you.
Grazie, Allison.
Grazie.
Allison.
Thank you so much.
Grazie,
And, I hope to see
bravissima.
you again soon.
Ciao, Alison.
Ciao, Giulia.
Buonanotte.
Ciao,
Palermo, okay?
grazie.
Prestissimo.
Good night.
Good night, Giacomo. Thanks for joining. It's the middle of the night where you are. Good night. Ciao, ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao,
Good night,
Bella.
everyone. Ciao.